Thank you very much.
Your network seems to be a bit of a problem. I can't hear everything that you say.
Yeah, I'm sure as we go, it will get better.
Okay.
But maybe we should start right away.
Yes.
Yeah, first of all, let's welcome everyone on the broadcast. And we will be discussing with the Deputy President of the EFF, FLOYD SHIVAMBU, a basic question, which is the impact of coronavirus on the economy. Normally, we've got a very limited time on this platform, so we'll try to get through most of these questions in an hour. So maybe we should start precisely there, DP, as to how can you characterize the recent outbreak of COVID-19 and its impact on the economy? Maybe that can be the first question.
That's fine. I would think that perhaps we need to state some hard facts now so that we do not border on conspiracies. There's too much conspiracies that is happening around the outbreak of corona. Let us maybe rely on the World Health Organization information that is available so that we're able to give a clearer context that we have got COVID-19, which is one of the coronaviruses. It's a respiratory syndrome which started in Wuhan in the Hubei province in China. And there's an interesting aspect which we mentioned in one of the articles we wrote last week to say that the Wuhan city in Hubei province hosted the World Military Games in October 2019, which had all militaries in terms of like sporting activities. So there were more than 10,000 different sporting people who went to China to participate there. And this is a very important issue because we shouldn't easily delve into conspiracies, but it is important to highlight because there is not yet a pinpointing of what is the origins of this coronavirus. Like some are saying it's from the animal, it's from animals, like it's a zoonotic disease, but there has not yet been a clear scientific discovery of where it comes from. And there are those who suppose that it could be part of the biological warfare, which was forbidden in 1925 by the Geneva Protocol, but was later on resuscitated during the Second World War by almost all the major opponents in the Second World War, which basically like build laboratory and chemical capacity to manufacture diseases in terms of what happens. So if you check what the US did, what Japan did, what France did, all of them were stockpiling diseases as part of their weapons in a world war. So now we've got a crisis that has now spread globally in terms of what happens. It has largely disrupted globalization in a way that is going to have long-lasting economic and political impact. And what will be the obvious economic impact is the fact that the number of consumers, like the whole consumption that is essential to capitalism, is going to be significantly reduced. So capitalism, it's basically a relationship between production and consumption. And capitalist crisis in the Marxist terms happens when there is overproduction and underconsumption. So already the underconsumption that is defining the world now due to lockdowns in almost all parts of the world will significantly impact the economy. It will slow the expansion of the economy. It will lead to a recession. I think we must be the first ones to say that not just global recession, it will lead to a global depression, possibly to the same levels as the 1929-1930 depression, because there is no foreseeable solution that is going to come out of this crisis of a highly infectious and contagious disease that is spreading across a lot of people. And you must remember that the numbers that are being reported now is numbers that were tested in the past 14 days of a lot of people. So you're still going to have a lot of people who are going to be revealed as having been infected by this COVID-19 virus. COVID-19 is coronavirus disease 19, referring to 2019. So it was still going to have a bigger crisis of a global shutdown of the economy, which will lead to high levels of unemployment, which will lead to low economic growth. And the biggest threat in terms of economic growth, it's that if the economy does not expand, the base upon which nation states collect the revenue is going to be significantly reduced. Like in South Africa, we collect 1.6 million trillion rands every year from revenue. That is going to be significantly reduced, possibly by 40 to 50% in terms of what we collect, because there's no production of goods and services. A lot of companies that were surviving from a subsistence in terms of their own checkbooks and their own balance sheet are going to close forever. And there are industries which are also not going to recover in the foreseeable future, like the tourism industry. So even after the coronavirus pandemic, a lot of people will not be keen on global travel for tourist purposes, like for tourism purposes. So
Okay,
yeah,
DP.
yes.
I want us to move at a pace that everybody can sort of be accommodated.
All right.
So what you've done is basically, So what you've done is basically described there is an outbreak of a pandemic. We don't know its origins, number one, for sure. Number two, we couldn't say that it is part of a biological warfare. We don't know if there is a biological warfare. But what we know is that there is an outbreak of a pandemic which is disrupting the world. So the first thing you said is that it's going to disrupt, or it is disrupting, production and consumption. Just break down for us, in what way is the outbreak of this pandemic disrupting production and consumption of goods and products?
You know, there are these, so consumption basically refers to the actual usage of the goods and products and services that are provided by an economy. So if you book a flight, you're consuming a service and you pay money for that particular purpose. If you book into a hotel and engage in whatever things that comes with the hotel, food, entertainment, a variety of things, it's part of the whole cycle of global economic production. So a lot of that, including the actual production of products like the automobiles and gadgets and a variety of other things, has been globally disrupted by this phenomenon. And you know that almost all lockdowns forbid people from purchasing the non-essential goods and products, meaning that the goods that were produced are not going to be consumed for a significant period of time. And because that buying, that exchange of goods and services is what ultimately becomes the national income, or the GDP, that is going to be significantly impacted and negatively impacted in a way that will cause recession. And once recession is sustained over a long period of time, it then becomes depression, because the entire global value chain in terms of production of goods and services and products has been disrupted. The factories are not working, and the consumers are not buying those goods and services and products. So that is where we are now, that capitalism has basically been disrupted by a pandemic whose origin we still do not know.
So just for clarity, this is not a crisis of capitalism itself. It is a crisis as a result of a disease or a pandemic. I mean, it's not like capitalism is internally disrupting itself.
Yes.
Will I be correct to understand you that this is like a pandemic and therefore people are not going to produce? As a result, people are not getting wages and therefore they are not going to buy on the stores. I mean, even the things that are called essential services, once people don't have money to buy those essential services, they too won't be bought. And then the crisis would have unraveled. But this is not a crisis of capitalism. Can you just explain that quickly?
Look, so it's not an internal crisis of capitalism. It's an external crisis that has been imposed on the capitalist logic of resource distribution. So, in capitalism, it's about private individuals who own major factories, the banks and everything else. And then for them to sustain that distributive system, they have to get consumers to buy that on a constant basis. So at times, a contradiction exists within a capitalist system where the producers of goods and services overproduce, and then the people who are supposed to consume do not have enough resources to buy those, and then that becomes the internal capitalist crisis. But there are crises of capitalism that come from outside, like this pandemic that has basically halted all forms of production, and to a significant extent has disrupted a bigger portion of the consumption of the capitalist productive distributive system. So capitalism is disrupted from outside, and it could have been possibly been a different impact if, let's say, a lot of essential services were not were not given to people for profit purposes. It could have been a different impact if we're producing a lot of things, like industry was producing to meet the human need. The impact was not going to be as huge as it is now. The nature and the form that capitalism took is that it took real production and monetarized it into some fictitious capital. So the mines are now represented through money in a stock market. And people who control that money have got no direct relationship with the mine. So like the shareholders of Lonmin in Marikana, they are somewhere in Britain, they don't even know where Marikana is, they don't know the conditions of workers, they've got no relationship with the actual productive process. They are just shareholders somewhere there. On what Marx said in Capital Volume 3, capital, and is extremely vulnerable in terms of what it is. And if you quantify now the extent at which fictitious capital has been disrupted, it's trillions of dollars. So, just before the corona outbreak, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange had a market capitalization of 16 trillion. And now it has lost more than 6 trillion rands of that value. So it shows that it's just fictitious capital, that it's supposed to represent the real productive activities on the ground, but there's no relationship. So in a huge way, capitalism and its fictitious nature has been disrupted, and it will take a very long time to then deal with that. I think we'll then respond to what then happens after the capitalist logic is disrupted in the manner that it has been disrupted thus far.
Yeah. Let's go to ordinary lives. This lockdown, you've already said that the lockdown results in the shutting down of the factory on one hand. On the other, the worker not going to work, majority of the workers, and then only essential services taking place.
Yes.
But in a country with 29% of unemployment, already a significant part of the population doesn't work. It doesn't receive its wages, its social inclusion through the wage. They either depend on social grants and so on and so forth. So what could you say about an economy with like 29%, is possibly more, percent of unemployment? How has that really disrupted those lives Haven't those lives always been disrupted?
Yeah, look, in South Africa, the situation will just worsen because, as you correctly characterize the South African nature of capitalism, South Africa is a neo-colonial capitalist state, meaning that whilst we operate within the capitalist logic of the private ownership of the key factories and banks and land and the distribution model after, we still have no capacity to produce a lot of the goods and services that we consume as South Africa. And that is, I think we've made this argument several times in Parliament to illustrate that at the core of South Africa's unemployment is the fact that we do not have substantial industrial capacity to produce our own goods and services. We do not produce like a lot of things, like everything else that surrounds us is produced elsewhere. The televisions, the phones that we're utilizing to communicate with, the vehicles, like virtually everything, the clothes that we wear, the shoes that we walk with, everything else is produced outside. And in that way, we have been mostly consuming the goods and products that are coming from the mostly industrialized parts of the world, from China, from America, from Europe, and from some parts of South America in the recent past. So South Africa's crisis is just going to get worse because we are basically, in terms of the real definition, well, they call it expanded definition of unemployment, we're likely going to exceed 50%. So 50% or more of people who are capable of working and can work are looking for jobs, or are now tired of looking for jobs, still are going to be out of work post this coronavirus, because it is going to disrupt the economy in a huge way. So in America, France, Italy, they are saying they are going into a huge unemployment crisis because unemployment is going to reach 20%. And ourselves have already been above that already. So you can imagine what will be the impact of all of those issues. And the other thing that is going to be an inevitable consequence of this coronavirus will be growing economic nationalism. So a lot of countries, so you hear the rhetoric already from Donald Trump and the Americans, are basically saying that we're tired of these things, of the global supply chain arrangements, of having to rely on China for ventilators, and then they instruct Ford or General Motors in America to start producing ventilators. And be rest assured that such is going to be a permanent feature of the post-corona period, where almost all economies will look into inward industrialization, something which we had called for in a different context as the EFF, to say that we need to produce our own goods and services. So that is basically what we're going to have. We're going to have a huge degree of inward industrialization. We're going to have a huge degree of people who will then say they are focusing on themselves. They don't want to depend on other parts of the world. But that is not a solution in a manner that is supposed to be. There are a variety of things that differently. Are you still there, Commissar? Commissar Mbuyiseni. Commissar Mbuyiseni.
Network problems. I don't know if you.
Myself, I'm still here.
Okay, I was trying to fix the internet. Am I audible?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. No. Just another question. I mean, just zooming into the healthcare space. You were saying earlier on, a natural disaster, should we call it, of this nature, could have been responded to in a much better form if production in society was not for profit maximization.
Yes.
But if it was for profit, and that we can see in the sort of like of health care between healthcare pharmacy and the distribution generally of these two services through. Could you just break it down for us? If healthcare was like a powerful government quality institution, in what way would it have been different? In what way would our response be, with the is now with the sort of separation between private and public healthcare?
Yeah, look, do you know, the other thing which a lot of people have not paid attention to is that, healthcare was not much of a business sphere, business environment for the longest time. So post-World War II and post-collapse of the Soviet Union, now when the neoliberals were beginning to push for neoliberalism, one of the immediate to make private was healthcare. So, like neoliberalism was basically to say that let the state not get involved in the provision of basic services. And the first victim, the biggest victim in terms of the provision of basic services was healthcare, with the introduction of private healthcare groups, health insurance, medical schemes, and a variety of things that got to define that particular space. So and inevitably, we are going to go back to an environment where healthcare is a public good. But what is very interesting, and which is what is going to basically define the nature of healthcare that is going to come post-corona, it's that healthcare is going to be a globally coordinated effort. So it will matter for the capitalists in America, in Europe, in any other part of the world to know what is the healthcare conditions of people of Alexander, or people of Rwanda, or people of Cameroon, or people of Ghana, or people of Nigeria. Because this corona has illustrated that if you neglect proper healthcare in any part of the world, you are going to disrupt global economic distribution and logic. So you can't always think that healthcare must only be your area of concern only as a country. You must know that you've got an obligation for the healthcare of everywhere else. That is why, as left forces, as socialist forces, we should use this moment to call for a holistic approach to healthcare. And what does that mean? You must demand that each and every person in the world must have access to proper shelter. Each and every person must have access to proper quality water. Each and every person must have proper access to proper nutrition. Because if you neglect that part, we're most likely to have another pandemic that is going to once again disrupt the production and distribution of goods. So I think that the globalization of healthcare will be a consequence. And one of the issues that were raised is that two options that must be looked into. One is to give a bigger portion of the population some intermediary skills on healthcare. So you can be a member of parliament and then you get some training on how to administer primary healthcare to each and every person, like in the way that you've got a reserve military. So you've got professionals who are part of the military, are called in whenever there's a war. So we need to build health reserves everywhere in the world. South Africa should look into that. Train teachers, train police, train members of parliament, train councillors, train everyone on basic healthcare issues, and even maybe avail some medical equipment and basic things that whenever there's a healthcare outbreak, it's attended to. But also, I don't know why we didn't do this a long time ago. Because we do not have war now. I think all military personnel should be dually trained as medical practitioners even if they are not the most sophisticated medical practitioners. They don't have to be doctors or nurses, but they must have some basic appreciation of healthcare so that when they are called in times of pandemics, they have the necessary impact in terms of how we then deal with these issues. Commissar?
Okay, yeah, that's fine. You move very fast, DP, but I will, I want to take you back because I wanted to smuggle a much more sort of complex description of the healthcare system.
Yes.
You know, the EFF had an entire year dedicated to healthcare in 2018.
Yeah.
And then this year in 2020, the EFF is dedicated to the financial sector, a huge chunk of which is medical aid.
Yes.
Which is the fictitious capital that you were mentioning earlier on. Now, and then you've got pharmaceutical companies. It's not a unitary whole. You know, these medical aids, you've got the actual institutions, the hospitals, the clinics, and then you've got pharmaceutical companies that are operating elsewhere.
Yes.
And so I wanted you to speak to how would, coronavirus, is it disrupting these institutions? If it is, in what way is it disrupting these institutions? And if it's making a case for a free, coordinated healthcare system, how would such a system work? Would medical aid still be necessary? Would pharmaceutical companies still have to be operated, you know, outside the healthcare, public healthcare system? Yeah.
That's, you know, one of the things which inevitably will have to do is to have a publicly owned and controlled public healthcare system, like healthcare system that is efficient, that is able to respond effectively to all the health demands of our people. And when we must talk about the entire value chain from the pharmaceutical side. You know, like when we visited Cuba and we met with the big pharma, the pharmaceutical components of Cuba, they illustrated that for more than 20 years they have tried to persuade the South African government to have some degree of partnership with South Africa on the pharmaceutical sector, on the production of generic medicines and even specialized medicines and vaccines, which prevent diseases. So vaccines are not reactive medicines; they are proactive medicines. So you get an injection so that you do not contract that virus forever. Like, you know, when we had, almost all of us, the stamp here of polio vaccination. So we've been negligent as South Africa. Generation of governments after generation, they have been negligent in terms of paying attention to the pharmaceutical sector of production of goods and services. But if you check now, last year we spent about 40 billion rands buying medicines and medical equipment from China, from Europe, from other parts of the world, because we have not invested in the internal capacity to deal with our own pharmaceutical production, to deal with our own medical equipment production, despite a huge opportunity that has been presented by Cuba and other allies who can say that you need to have some degree of sovereignty when it comes to healthcare. And then we then need to have quality hospitals which administer first primary healthcare. And what is this thing of primary healthcare that we speak about? Is to say that healthcare provision should always be preventive. Like, you must not wait for people to come to a hospital. There must be deployment of healthcare practitioners in almost all the areas. So in the area, we say each ward must have a clinic. In the EFF, we say each ward must have a healthcare clinic so that it deals with healthcare issues in those areas. And that is how you will then be able to then prevent the spread of diseases. Because once you have got a clinic, there are even polyclinics at the VD level. So wherever there's a voting station, there must be a polyclinic, either a mobile clinic or a polyclinic that is a brick and mortar that administers to the prevention of health diseases. So that is basically what we need to then deal with. And hospitalization must be the last resort after you have failed to contain a disease where it is coming from. I need to get back Kommissar Mbuyiseni because it's the one who is interviewing me. Kommissar Mbuyiseni. Kommissar Mbuyiseni is going to be coming back now. We're having a very interesting discussion on healthcare and corona.
I don't know if I'm back, DP.
You're back now.
Okay, is it better?
Yes, I was still speaking about primary healthcare, that we need a healthcare system that is preventive. So you know in Cuba has got the best healthcare system in the world because it is a preventive healthcare system. So the polyclinics and the clinics in the communities, based polyclinics or VD-based polyclinics and clinics, they don't wait for people to come to them. They go to the people and have health profiles of each and every individual. So so you've got doctors dedicated to a certain number of people. You've got other health practitioners that are being dedicated to certain groups of people, and they they know the health profile of their people. They know just how many people are exposed to kind of diseases. They know the family histories in terms of the genetic diseases, that no, this area has got this challenge and this is how we must respond to that. So we need to have a publicly owned, coordinated and controlled public healthcare system whose primary focus must be primary healthcare. I mean, we have got 2,000 students in Cuba now who are being trained as medical doctors, and almost all of them appreciate that South Africa has to transit towards a primary healthcare focus instead of the whole thing of hospitalization, because the Department of Health in South Africa, it's like a department of hospitals and clinics. There's no proactive action. There's no proactive action that is done on healthcare. Like there's no public health education. It's only now when there's a corona that they try to educate people about corona. But there's never been any public education outside of AIDS and TB and corona. Yeah, because they ordinary people should know that what are the things that will expose me to cancer, to hepatitis B, to diabetes, to all these things. Like it must be basic knowledge in all spheres of society that I can't like if I engage in these activities, if I smoke alcohol every day, these are the consequences. And this is what I should do. So there is not a proper mass education on primary health care, which could save us billions of rands because we would not need to deal with hospitalization.
Okay, TP. So let's go to these proposals. I mean, a lot of people keep, raising this question of Bill Gates and what he said. I mean, prior to what Bill Gates said on Trevor Noah's show, and ultimately, I think, to Ramaphosa, there were these French doctors that were speaking about testing the coronavirus vaccine in the continent, in Africa.
Yeah.
And then it was followed as well, it seems, by Bill Gates. Can you just give us, what would be the proper reading of what Bill Gates is trying to do in the world today I mean, Bill Gates is a university dropout, left Harvard without completing a degree, and to pursue becoming a billionaire because he was a computer nerd. He also never acted in his entire life in the medical sciences. Why the hell is Bill Gates trying to lead us when it comes to how we respond to a global pandemic, and particularly the solutions in relation to vaccines?
No, let's deal with the factual issues so that we're able to locate this issue around Bill Gates. So Bill Gates is engaged in some philanthropy, like this thing of billionaires giving assistance to governments and organizations, like NGOs mostly. So he has been saying for a long period of time now through the foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, has been working with the World Economic Forum and a variety of other organizations to say that there must be a worldwide vaccination of preventable diseases. Like he has always been imagining, actually, like doing some almost scientific predictions that we are likely to face a pandemic in the immediate future. So he gave a talk in the thing of TEDx talks, I think in 2015, where he was predicting that there might be a pandemic which might kill in excess of 10 million people or whatever number of people that could be killed. So they've been dealing with those things of vaccinations in terms of investing in that fraternity. So now this is how a vaccine operates, Comme Mbuyiseni. So a vaccine, you develop a medicine with the hope that if we inject people with this medicine, they won't contract a disease. And the only practical way to test that is not through animals, it's through human beings. You must inject people with that vaccine and then observe that same number of people. So if you injected 1,000 people with the vaccine, you observe them for a longer period of time, which is 12 to 18 months. And then you then go and test them if they were exposed to any disease that we're trying to prevent. And then you will then be able to then say that this vaccine works. So the only way to test a vaccine is through injecting it on people in terms of what happens. I do not know the impact that Bill Gates has had in terms of the fight against malaria, because part of the research of that foundation which he leads was mostly dedicated on malaria. So he had made a commitment that he's going to eradicate, is going to eliminate malaria, the whole world. That medicine which they speak about is called hydroxychloroquine. It's part of their development in terms of funding of the pharmaceutical industries that produce different vaccines. So he has not said that he is going to test the vaccines in Africa. The French doctors said that they are going to test the vaccines in Africa to observe, and that is problematic. Like, they must test amongst themselves. Like, they must start in Europe. If they want to test a vaccine, they must test it in Europe, but they must test it everywhere. I think that we should have some degree of science that you can't test the vaccine elsewhere except with people. And the permanent solution to the corona pandemic now is through a vaccine that will prevent all of us from ever contracting a vaccine. And because it is a respiratory syndrome, there is some vaccines that have been developed for respiratory diseases like flu. So there's a flu vaccine in the world, so maybe there's a proper foundation to could develop a vaccine for corona in terms of how it should be. But I agree with all the comrades. I agree with all the comrades and the fighters that are saying that we are not guinea pigs. We must not just be the testing laboratories of
but okay, so as I understand, a vaccine
and we are legitimate. We are legitimate. We are legitimate to doubt Bill Gates, because he possibly will be the biggest beneficiary financially of a worldwide vaccination program. Because why? Because he's invested in almost all of these major pharmaceutical companies, Johnson and Johnson, and the rest of them. So he stands to personally and privately benefit. And you know, once a vaccine of corona is announced, all the 7 billion people in the world will be vaccinated. So you can imagine how much money that will be for whoever gets that production turned.
You see, now I want to move the conversation to a slightly different question about a post coronavirus world. But I want to say two things to which I would like your reaction on. One is, Bill Gates is a capitalist.
Yes.
So the entire philanthropy is a mirage, is a masquerade to drive a basic capitalist project which is self-beneficial to himself. So this tiptoeing around him must actually not happen. He's part of the establishment, and he's got a lot of shares in big pharmaceutical companies. So it is good for us to doubt his intentions, as it were.
Yeah,
that's the first part.
Yes, I agree with you that.
The second part.
Yes.
Yeah, the second part that we don't want to move from this question without being very clear about is that it's actually before you do human trials, when you're looking for a vaccine that will work, they do animal trials because vaccines can have all sorts of health consequences. So the first human trials being conducted in Africa, that thought in and of itself, taking into consideration that the continent doesn't have a big number of corona positive people, it's actually part of why we describe the West as racist.
Yes, you're right.
Because we are part of the animal. We're the closest to, so if you are with the monkey, you can come to a black person because it doesn't matter what happens to us.
No, you're right. You know, actually, it doesn't have any scientific basis could want to test a vaccine in Africa which has got no widespread infections. Like, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any natural scientific sense. Like, in the manner that it would.
It's racism.
Yeah.
That's the sense. Racism.
Yes,
racism.
They should test it. They should test it where there is a widespread infection. So they must get a group of people who do not have the disease and then inject them there in Italy, and then observe them, like, because that is where the spread is much more wide. But one thing which scientifically we should not fight against is an introduction of vaccine. Vaccine is a permanent solution, and where we should be looking up to is Cuba, and because Cuba has developed a lot of vaccines that have saved the world, and they've got huge pharmaceutical capacity to could develop vaccines that I do not know why we do not work much more emphatically on the pharmaceutical relationship that we have with Cuba, because Cuba could be the savior of the world again in terms of the production of this vaccine that is going to then deal with. And then I see people are asking about 5G on your page. You don't want to ask about 5G?
We'll come to that.
All right.
Yeah, we'll come to the 5th generation telecommunications capacity and the sort of concept of the smart city. Before we go there, let's come back home a little bit.
Yes.
A bit of a critique of South African government's response to the pandemic. So the government released regulations, which had very little economic measures.
Yes.
And I wanted to give you an opportunity to explain the economic measures that the EFF has been recommending and the significance of these economic measures to the success of the fight against the pandemic on one hand, but ultimately how they may assist in sustaining the economy, but also a possible better economic or a better post-coronavirus economic atmosphere. What are these economic measures? Why is the South African government not implementing them? Why are they tiptoeing around them? And why are they significant to the success of the pandemic, of the fight against the pandemic?
Look, South Africa is one of the relatively developed countries that just announced a lockdown. And I think when Ramaphosa made the first announcement, I think it was the 15th of March. I don't know what date was it. He almost committed that the other measures are going to be announced at a subsequent stage by the economic cluster. But the economic cluster has not said anything, by the way. Because in terms of the macro...
Tito
Mbuyiseni has never said anything.
Yeah, where is he, TP? Where is Tito Mbuyiseni? Do you know his whereabouts?
I don't know. I think he's hiding in Mahoba's
Is Tito Mbuyiseni at work? Is he reporting to work every day?
He's hiding at Mahoba's kloof. He's having palpitations because he's been downgraded by Fitch and by that other capitalist establishment called Moody's. So he's hiding in terms of... And this is the time where you need very clear macroeconomic measures. So macroeconomic measures is how do you use fiscal policy to save our people from starvation. Fiscal policy is how you distribute government money. So there's not been a clear, except the few billions by a small business department, which is saying people must apply for loans and this and that. And so there's not been any fiscal policy intervention that came from the state since the whole corona outbreak, since the lockdown. So they just said, go home, and they have not announced...
Please break it down.
Yeah,
what would have been fiscal intervention? Just
you see,
for accessibility.
So the Americans, they signed a $2 trillion a bill in Parliament, which basically was a withdrawal of $2 trillion from their National Revenue Fund to give to people. So all the people who are in America have been given a minimum of $1,200 per person. So in South African money, currently it will be 20,000 plus.
Yeah.
Because the exchange rate now is quite 18 rand, 19 rand. In terms of, and they give $1,200 per adult, and for children it's $500 for all the adults. And almost all other governments in Europe, there's a packaged arrangement to say that we have said you must go home, and still food is for sale. Like there's not been an announcement that food is no longer for sale now. And we do not know how we should survive, and for you to survive you need money. But also once you inject that money, it helps you with the economy later on, because there will still be continued buying even by people who otherwise are not going to buy anything, and then it will have some economic positive consequences, because as we said elsewhere, government expenditure is equals to national income. It contributes to national income. It's not a loss in the GDP terms. So government had to release money for an economic stimulus, mostly to the people, not to companies. To people, and then companies will see how they survive out of that. Majority of them have got reserves that can weather the storm currently. But in South Africa, we do not have any fiscal intervention in terms of what should happen. The only thing which Tito Mbuyiseni said was that when he was doing an interview with Sunday Times last week, he said that he's going to go to the IMF to borrow money. For what purpose, we do not know, because there's not been a quantification of just how much money do we need to stabilize our healthcare system in this crisis. We have not done that modeling yet, but he wants to borrow money from IMF. And once you take money from the IMF, they take your fiscal policy sovereignty. You no longer... So they basically say, we've borrowed you money, but tell us how much money in total do you have. and then they tell you where you must spend the money. They'll say, no, cut off this, cut off this, cut off this, cut off this, and prioritize expenditure on these areas. And all the interventions of, and then I'll just quickly, and the other less than satisfactory macroeconomic intervention that we have not made is in regard to monetary policy. I mean, like almost all governments, almost all central banks, not governments, have reduced their interest rates to almost zero. Almost zero. Here in South Africa, it's 1% reduction, 100 basis point, by a very conservative governor of the Reserve Bank. It's the most conservative, more conservative and right-wing. Reactionary, yes. Yeah. Than any other person you can ever meet. And for what purpose, you will not know, because we are in a crisis. We should make money available to our people to save the economy, but to also more fundamentally save our people from the crisis that we're confronted with currently. That is what we then need to deal with.
Okay, I wanted to say, shouldn't government have told the financial sector to give payment holidays, insurance, school fees, bonds, rents, all these sort of basic,
I think that is
month-to-month,
yes, the expenses
requirements.
That is, and you know, so when Ramaphosa made the lockdown announcement, he said banks are going to tell you after they have met with the regulatory authorities, the Competition Commission, in terms of the interventions that they're going to make to mitigate against the impact of the coronavirus. And there's no clear common guideline of what should happen. So Standard Bank says that we're going to make loans cheaper for people who earn less than 7,500. And ABSA says something different. FNB has not yet announced anything comprehensive of what should happen. Nedbank has not said
I don't know why people bank with FNB, you know?
Yeah, it's part of the big problem. Yeah, it's part of the establishment, which is extremely problematic. And so the central bank, national treasury, working with this command council, which doesn't seem to exist, they were supposed to then say that these are the interventions at micro level that must be made in all the banks, that let us have an interest-free payment holiday. So it must not, because you know, when they say payment holiday for 3 months, it must, the debt must not gain interest during that period. It must not grow.
Yes.
The debt must not grow. Yes. The debt pattern must not grow. They were supposed to make those holistic interventions across all the banking sector, because then we're in a disaster environment, we're in an emergency situation in which the state must begin to intervene to say that let us have a payment interest-free holiday for all the people who are supposed to pay for their cars, for their houses, and for rentals and everything else. Almost all other countries, the developed world or developing world, they do those interventions. But in South Africa, there is no intervention because the Ministry of Finance has resigned. They went to hide somewhere. We don't know where they are. They've not said anything. And they are the ones who are in control of both fiscal and monetary policy. And they are also in control in terms of regulatory mechanisms of all banks, because they all are regulated by the central bank, the South African Reserve Bank. So there is actually a huge crisis that is being worsened by the current political leadership. They're not helping us to move out of this.
Okay. Now, what is 5G and what does it have anything, or does it have anything to do with coronavirus? There's a lot of speculation out there, but maybe you start firstly by explaining to us what is 5G, and then does it have anything to do with coronavirus?
No, 5G doesn't have anything to do with coronavirus. There's no science that links the 5G. And I think the world broadly is just apprehensive that there's going to be this transition to a telecommunication model which will make internet fast and will actually revolutionize the world in a significant way because of high connectivity that is going to be brought forth by this 5G. So I know a sensible scientific deduction of what could be a health relationship between 5G and people's bodies could be that it might cause some fatigue or headaches and everything else, because I think the movements of these radiation almost always has some consequences in terms of what should happen. So the 5G communication the model has got no relationship with the respiratory illness. I think it will be impossible to do so. And of course, there are those who are arguing that the advocates of 5G want to utilize this period to justify a rapid transition to 5G. You know, in South Africa, it's going to be rolled out by a company called Rain. Rain is owned by Patrice Motsepe. Is going to roll out that, and it's going to be connecting our phones, our computers. It's going to guide how driverless cars are going to move, and driverless trucks, and a variety of other things. Like, it's going to take technology it's going to automate almost all of us, by the way. Like, we're just going to become automatic beings that are controlled by technology elsewhere. That is what the consequences. That is the consequences of 5G. That it has got a relationship with Corona.
So you would say, okay. So I want us to now move to the sort of post-coronavirus world. I don't know when will that world be. Even by the estimation of vaccines take a very long time to develop, 8 months at least. So we are looking at a very, very long period. Maybe, somewhere in November, earliest October, when they can post-coronavirus world. Would I be right with those estimations?
Yeah, it will take a very long time to have a post-corona world, because even when the vaccine has been discovered, it will take a very long time to administer it to all the people in the world. But two streams are inevitably going to emerge in terms of global politics post the corona. One will be the isolationists, and two will be the multilateralists. There are those who are going to say, as a country, we're going to develop our country solutions and close the borders permanently, or for a very long time, that whoever wants to come to our country as part of the visa requirement, undergo substantive medical tests and everything else. So there are those who are going to be isolationist and say we're going to solve our problems alone, without depending on anyone. We don't want any visitors anymore because this thing came with visitors. And then there are those who are going to advocate, like the General Secretary of the United Nations is doing now, Antonio Guterres, for a multilateral response to the corona, the post-corona period. The issues that we spoke about of globally integrating healthcare in all parts of the world, and have clear monitors in each and every country that is going to then deal with those issues. It looks like our video is completed in the other platform that we're broadcasting from. So we're going to have those who are going to say we're going to solve our problems as a country, and then there are those who are going to say let us have a multilateral approach. It's going to be very difficult to achieve de-globalization in a crisis that we're facing. But all of us, comrades, let us continue to engage in all these issues. We had thought that we should share some notes and interaction so that all of us must think. So there's a quote which is very interesting that says that the problem starts with thinking. So all of us must think. We must empower ourselves with the capacity and the instruments that will make us to think. Let us read and learn so that we continue to contribute to the society. Thank you very much for those who have joined us via Facebook. And I'm aware that the questions that Kommissar Mbuyiseni was asking, but we're then going to then deal with that at a subsequent stage. Thank you very much.